The sun hadn't even risen fully, but the air already felt heavy, dry, sharp, like breathing through sandpaper. In a small village tucked between cracked earth and thorny acacia trees, a young girl sat near the edge of what used to be their water reservoir. Now, it was just blackened mud and the smell of smoke. Her bare feet dug into the dirt, not because she wanted to play, but because she didn't know what else to do with her hands. Just hours before, men in uniforms had come. Not peacekeepers. Not helpers. They rolled in with trucks and shouted orders nobody understood. When the village elders tried to speak calmly, respectfully, they were shoved aside. Then came the flames. Someone threw something into the reservoir. It caught fast. The last clean water they had went up in thick, oily smoke. She watched it all from behind a broken wall, eyes wide, heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Her older brother stood beside her, phone in hand, filming everything. His hand shook, but he kept recording. "They need to see this," he whispered, more to himself than to her. She didn't understand who they were, but she knew this wasn't right. Nothing about it felt fair. By mid-morning, the soldiers were gone. The village was quiet, except for the crying of babies and the low murmurs of adults trying to figure out what to do next. No water, no crops, no help coming. Just dust and fear. But her brother didn't sit still. He walked to the only place in the village with a weak cell signal, a rocky hill behind the old school, and uploaded the video. It took forever. The screen froze twice. But finally, it sent. He didn't say much after that. Just handed her a dry piece of bread and said, "Eat, we'll be okay." He didn't believe it. She could tell. What he didn't know was that thousands of miles away, someone else was also watching the world burn, just in a different way. Deep in the rainforest, where the trees grew so tall they blocked out the sky, a man stood knee-deep in a river, checking fishing nets with his cousin. They'd been up since dawn. Life here moved slowly, quietly, guided by generations of knowledge passed down through stories, not screens. But lately, the forest had been restless. Strange sounds at night. Machines growling in the distance. Planes flying too low. That morning, they found footprints near their sacred grove boots, not bare feet, and tire tracks leading deeper into protected land. Before they could warn anyone, gunfire echoed through the trees. By the time help arrived, it was too late. His cousin didn't make it. The attackers armed men with no badges. No names vanished back into the green dot. News traveled slowly in the forest, but when it did, it carried weight. At a community meeting under a giant ceiba tree, elders spoke in hushed tones about new laws that opened their land to mining. Laws made in cities they'd never seen, by people who'd never tasted their river water or heard the howler monkeys at sunrise. The man sat silently, gripping a small carved bird his cousin had given him. He didn't cry. Not yet. But something inside him shifted, like a stone turning over in deep water. Meanwhile, in a cold city far to the north, a woman stared at her computer screen, tired and frustrated. She worked as a climate researcher, crunching numbers most people ignored. But these numbers weren't just data, they told stories. Stories of forests disappearing, rivers drying up, villages abandoned. And always, violence followed close behind. She tried to publish her latest findings, a clear link between corporate land grabs and spikes in attacks on local communities. But her university asked her to soften the language. Too political, they said. Too risky. So she sat alone in her apartment, snow falling outside, wondering if truth mattered, if nobody would let it be heard. Then, late one night, she saw the video from the dry village. The burning reservoir. The child's face. She watched it 3 times. Each time, her chest tightened. She pulled up her own maps, cross-referenced them with satellite images, and realized something chilling. The same company buying up land in Kenya was also linked to mining operations in the Amazon. And both places had seen sudden increases in violence against locals. Thought it wasn't coincidence. It was a pattern. She stayed up until sunrise, writing. Not for journals. Not for approval. She posted everything online raw, unfiltered, with sources anyone could check. She didn't care about being professional anymore. She cared about being honest. Within a day, her post was shared across continents. Farmers in India quoted it. Students in Canada held vigils. A retired teacher in South Africa emailed her. Thank you for saying what we've all been feeling. Back in the village, the girl's brother saw the messages pouring in. Strangers calling their home brave. Calling their pain unacceptable. For the first time in weeks, he smiled. Just a little. He showed his sister a comment from someone in Norway. We see you. We're with you. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood the feeling. Like a hand reaching across the world to hold hers. That night, sitting around a small fire made from dried branches, the grandmother, the oldest person in the village, spoke softly. There comes a time, she said, her voice like wind through dry grass, when being polite while they destroy your home is not wisdom. It's surrender. Her grandson looked up. What do we do then? She met his eyes. Then we stop being civilized. The words hung in the air, heavy and true. Not a call for anger, not a cry for revenge, but a quiet decision. No more silence. No more waiting for someone else to fix what's broken. And somewhere, in 3 different corners of the earth, 3 people hurt, tired, but not defeated, felt the same shift. The world had shown them its cruelty. Now, they would show it their courage, not with weapons, not with hate, but with truth, with memory, and with the stubborn belief that people matter more than profit. The spark had been lit, and it wouldn't go out. The days after the video went viral didn't bring miracles, but they brought movement. In the village, people stopped waiting for trucks with water or officials with promises. Instead, they gathered under the big acacia tree every evening, not just to mourn, but to plan. Someone remembered an old well their grandparents used before the reservoir was built. Another had a cousin who knew how to filter rainwater using charcoal and cloth. They started digging again, hands blistered, back sore, but spirits strangely lighter. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Meanwhile, online, the phrase, "Now we stop being civilized," began appearing everywhere. Not as a threat, but as a quiet declaration. A fisherman in the Philippines posted a photo of his boat blocking a giant trawler from dragging its nets through coral reefs. Beneath it, he wrote those words. In Detroit, a group of neighbors turned an empty lot into a garden after the city shut off water to families behind on bills. Their handmade sign read, "We grow food where they plant neglect." Same phrase underneath. Governments called it disorder. News channels labeled it radical. But to the people living it, it felt like finally breathing after years of holding their breath. In the rainforest, the man who lost his cousin didn't go back to fishing. Instead, he walked for 3 days to meet other villages affected by the same mining crews. They shared stories of intimidation, of poisoned rivers, of elders too scared to leave their homes. One young woman had taught herself to fly a small drone using a manual she found online. She showed them how to map illegal roads cut into the forest. Another had learned basic law from a radio program and helped draft letters to international watchdog groups. They weren't warriors with guns. They were teachers, farmers, mothers, teenagers. But they were done asking nicely. Back in the northern city, the researcher watched her inbox fill, not with academic replies, but with messages from real people. A farmer in Guatemala sent grainy photos of bulldozers near his cornfield. A nurse in Bangladesh described how floods worse every year were spreading disease faster than medicine could keep up. Each message carried the same unspoken question. Is this connected? She knew it was not, so she stopped writing reports for closed-door meetings. She started making short videos simple, clear, no jargon. Just maps, dates, names of companies, and what they'd done. She uploaded them with subtitles in 5 languages. Within weeks, volunteers translated them into more. Teachers showed them in classrooms. Community centers played them on loop. The system tried to push back. Her university warned her about reputational risk. A news outlet ran a piece calling her alarmist. But something had changed. People weren't looking to institutions for truth anymore. They were building their own networks of trust. In Manila, when industrial ships returned to drain the coastal waters, something unexpected happened. Dozens of small fishing boats surrounded them, not to fight, but to sit. Just sat there, engines off, nets folded, singing old sea songs. Tourists filmed it. Locals brought them food. The big ships couldn't move without risking a global scandal. After 2 days, they turned around. It wasn't violence. It was presence. And presence, it turned out, was powerful. In Chicago, a group of former inmates, people who knew what it meant to be ignored, saw footage of homeless families being cleared from a park with tear gas. They'd been running a food kitchen out of a borrowed garage. Now, they marched downtown, not with anger, but with pots and ladles. If you're going to throw people out, one said to reporters, at least let them eat first. They set up a meal right on the steps of City Hall. Hundreds came. Cops stood nearby, unsure what to do. You can't arrest someone for serving soup. The media called it chaos. But to those eating, it felt like dignity. Everywhere. People were choosing action over permission. In Berlin, a quiet student who'd spent years coding in her bedroom leaked thousands of internal emails from a major oil company. Not to hurt anyone, but to show how executives knowingly funded politicians who weakened environmental laws. She didn't hide. She gave interviews. I'm not a hacker, she said calmly. I'm a citizen who read the fine print. The leak spread like wildfire. Protests erupted outside corporate offices from Oslo to Cape Town. But more importantly, local banks started getting calls. Is my money funding this? Pension funds began pulling out. Slowly, quietly, the money started moving away from destruction. Yet, the backlash came. Internet shutdowns hit rural areas during protests. Social media posts vanished without warning. Police began arresting organizers on vague charges like disturbing public order. In one country, a community radio station was shut down for spreading false information, just for playing the researchers' videos. Fear crept in. Some stepped back. Who could blame them? Rent still needed paying. Kids still needed feeding. But others dug deeper. In Kenya, the villagers started using old walkie-talkies and solar-powered radios to share updates when the internet went dark. In the Amazon, messengers on foot carried USB drives wrapped in leaves between villages. In cities, artists painted murals on boarded-up buildings, images of trees. Hands holding water, eyes wide open with the words, "We see you," hidden in the brushstrokes. The movement wasn't loud in the way the world expected. No explosions. No riots. Just stubborn, everyday acts of refusal. Refusing to stay silent. Refusing to forget. Refusing to act civilized. While the earth and its people were being torn apart. And slowly, the balance began to shift. Not because one person did something heroic, but because thousands of ordinary people decided, at the same time, that enough was enough. They weren't waiting for saviors. They were becoming each other's shelter. And in that, quiet rebellion in gardens, in boats, in coded messages, and shared meals, something new was growing. Not perfect. Not fast. But real. The world hadn't changed yet. But the people in it? They already had. The world kept turning, but something had shifted beneath the surface, like a river, changing course after years of quiet pressure. It started at the big climate meeting in Dubai. Every year, leaders flew in on private jets, gave speeches about hope and partnerships, then left while nothing really changed. But this time, something different happened. Outside the fancy conference center, hundreds of people gathered, not with signs or slogans, but in silence. They came from places most delegates had only seen in disaster reports: dry villages, flooded towns, forests scarred by fire and machinery. They held photos of grandparents, children, rivers, animals, everything they'd lost. No shouting, no demands, just presence. When security guards moved in to clear them, something unexpected happened. A few scientists stepped out of the building and joined the circle. Then a diplomat from a small island nation. Then a woman who ran a solar co-op in Nepal. Even a retired engineer who used to design pipelines now stood shoulder to shoulder with farmers whose land had been ruined by those same pipes. The guards paused. Who do you push away when the line between us and them starts to blur? Inside, the speeches felt hollow. Outside, truth sat quietly in the sun. Back in the village, the girl who once watched her water burn was now speaking into a microphone. Not a fancy one, just a second-hand radio mic powered by a car battery and a small solar panel. Her voice, soft but steady, traveled through handmade antennas to nearby settlements. She told stories: how her grandmother taught her to read clouds for rain, how her brother fixed a broken pump using parts from an old bicycle, how their new well was filling slowly but surely. People began calling in. A teacher shared a song about clean water. A farmer described how he planted drought-resistant seeds. A teenager read poetry she wrote under moonlight. The program wasn't news. It was memory and hope. And it spread not through algorithms, but through trust. In the rainforest, the man who lost his cousin led a journey unlike any before. Dozens of people from different tribes walked together not to protest, but to witness. They carried cameras, notebooks, and small sensors that measured air and water quality. At every illegal mining site, they documented everything. Not to shame, but to prove. When they reached a clearing where machines had torn open the earth, an elder knelt and placed a handful of seeds into the cracked soil. "We don't just record the wound," he said. "We plant the healing." Their footage didn't go to news stations first. It went straight to a people's tribunal, an online gathering of lawyers, scientists, and community leaders from over 30 countries. No government recognized it, but thousands watched. And for the first time, the voices from the forest weren't filtered through a corporate lens. They spoke for themselves. Meanwhile, the researcher in the northern city made a choice that surprised even her. She handed in her resignation, not because she gave up, but because she realized real change wasn't happening inside university walls. She joined a loose network of independent investigators who shared data openly, trained others to verify facts, and published everything in plain language. Her new office was a shared workspace in a repurposed bookstore. Her team included a former truck driver who mapped supply chains, a librarian who tracked policy changes, and a teenager who could spot fake news faster than any AI. They called themselves the Clearing, not as in destruction, but as in making space for truth to grow. Their first report linked 5 major companies to violence in 3 continents. But instead of burying readers in numbers, they told human stories. The midwife who couldn't reach patients because roads were blocked by logging trucks. The student who walked 10 miles for clean water after her school's well was poisoned. People shared it not because it was shocking, but because it felt true. In cities across the world, ordinary people began doing something simple but radical. They stopped waiting for permission to care. In Rotterdam, Dock workers noticed a shipment labeled agricultural equipment smelled like chemicals. They checked the manifest hidden behind layers of paperwork was a banned pesticide. Instead of unloading it, they refused. Their union backed them. The cargo sat on the dock for weeks until it was sent back. In a neighborhood in Mexico City, residents turned an abandoned factory into a food hub. They grew vegetables on rooftops, repaired old bikes to deliver meals to elders, and taught kids how to compost. When officials threatened to shut them down for illegal use of property, neighbors showed up with chairs and guitars. "We're having a community meeting," they said. "You're welcome to join if you bring cookies." The authorities didn't know how to respond to kindness wrapped in defiance. Even in places where fear ran deep, small acts multiplied. In one country where speaking out could mean jail, people started leaving jars of clean water outside police stations with notes, "For your family too. No accusations." Just a reminder, we all need the same things. And slowly, cracks appeared in the wall of silence. A junior official leaked internal memos, showing how permits were fast-tracked for companies that donated to political campaigns. A corporate employee anonymously sent safety reports proving a factory was dumping waste into a river. These weren't heroes in capes. They were tired people who finally chose conscience over comfort. The movement wasn't perfect. There were disagreements, mistakes, moments of doubt. But what held it together wasn't ideology, it was empathy. People weren't fighting against something anymore. They were building for someone. For the child who deserved clean water. For the elder who remembered how the forest used to sing. For the future that still had a chance, if they dared to protect it. And in that shift from rage to repair, from isolation to connection, the phrase, "Now we stop being civilized," took on a new meaning. It didn't mean becoming cruel. It meant refusing to play by rules that only protected the powerful. It meant choosing humanity over politeness. Truth over comfort. Life over profit. No grand revolution. Just daily decisions to listen, to share, to stand, to plant. And in those choices, a new world began to grow. Not someday. Now. Things didn't get easier, but they got clearer. People stopped asking for change from the top. Instead, they started building it from the ground up, like planting seeds in cracked earth and trusting they'd find a way to grow. In Guatemala, a village faced a strange kind of lawsuit. A big palm oil company claimed the land their families had lived on for generations now belonged to them, thanks to papers signed by someone nobody knew. The court date came. Lawyers in expensive suits showed up. Cameras rolled. But the villagers didn't bring lawyers. They brought food. On the morning of the hearing, they set up a long table outside the courthouse. They cooked tamales, boiled corn, made sweet plantain drinks, the kind you share with guests. Then they did something unexpected. They invited the company's CEO to sit with them. "Come eat," an elder said gently. "Then tell us why you think this land isn't ours." The CEO never came. But photos of the empty chair at the feast spread everywhere. People saw it not as weakness, but as strength, a quiet challenge wrapped in generosity. How do you argue against people who offer you food while defending their home? The legal battle dragged on, but the story stuck. Others began doing the same, turning courtrooms into classrooms, lawsuits into lessons about justice. Back in the dry village, the radio program had grown. Now, messages came in from across the region, not just updates, but songs, recipes, even jokes. Laughter returned, slowly, like rain after a long drought. One evening, the girl played a recording of her grandmother telling a folktale about a clever hare who outwitted a greedy lion by sharing water with everyone else. Listeners called it the story of our time. In the rainforest, the walking caravan had become a movement. Villages that once stayed hidden now welcomed visitors, not tourists, but learners. Young people from cities came to help map rivers, plant trees, and learn how to read animal tracks like sentences written in mud. Elders taught them that the forest wasn't just a resource, it was a relative. And you don't sell your family dot when drones spotted new illegal roads being cut instead of running. Communities marked the spots with bright cloth and placed handmade signs. This is where we remember. Not threats, memorials, and somehow, that made the machines stop more than any protest ever could dot in the northern city. The researchers collective, The Clearing, launched a global project called Truth and Repair. It wasn't about punishment. It was about healing. They created a simple online map where anyone could pin stories of harm and also solutions. A farmer in Senegal shared how he revived dead soil using compost and crop rotation. A nurse in the Philippines posted how her clinic used solar-powered fridges to keep vaccines cold during blackouts. Schools began using it, not as a textbook, but as a living library of hope. But power doesn't give up easily. Governments responded with tighter controls. Internet shutdowns became common during protests. Social media posts vanished without warning. In some places, just gathering in groups of 5 or more required a permit. Police used facial recognition at rallies. Fear crept back in. Yet, people adapted. In neighborhoods where phones were monitored, they used old-school methods, chalk messages on sidewalks, notes tucked into market baskets, coded phrases in local songs. In one town, kids played a clapping game that secretly listed safe meeting times. To outsiders, it sounded like play. To those who knew, it was a lifeline. Dock workers in Rotterdam kept refusing shipments tied to destruction. When pressured, they simply said, "We won't carry what hurts our children's future." Their union grew stronger, not weaker. Other ports followed: Hamburg, Durban, Vancouver. A quiet chain of conscience formed across oceans. In Chicago, the mutual aid hub expanded. What started as a kitchen became a place where people fixed bikes, mended clothes, taught each other how to install rain barrels. When the city tried to shut it down for zoning violations, neighbors showed up with folding chairs and board games. "We're just hanging out," they said with smiles. Cops couldn't arrest people for playing chess. The real shift wasn't in laws, it was in mindset. People stopped seeing themselves as victims waiting for rescue. They saw themselves as builders. A teacher in Nairobi turned her classroom into a repair lab. Kids learned to fix broken radios, rechargeable lamps, even water filters. "If they break it, we'll fix it," she told her students. "If they take it, we'll rebuild it." In Oslo, a group of retired engineers helped design low-cost air quality sensors that communities could build themselves. They mailed kits with instructions drawn like comic strips, so anyone, even without reading skills, could assemble them. Data flowed in from slums, farms, mountain villages. Clean air wasn't a luxury anymore. It was a right. People measured themselves. And through it all, the phrase, "Now we stop being civilized," kept evolving. It no longer meant anger. It meant clarity. It meant, we won't pretend kindness. When cruelty is happening, we won't stay silent to be polite. We won't wait for permission to protect what matters. One evening, during a rare video call between the girl in Kenya, the man in the Amazon, and the researcher up north, they talked not about loss, but about what they were growing. "I planted moringa trees near the well," the girl said. "They grow fast, good for shade and food. We're teaching kids to weave baskets from vines that grow over mining scars," the man replied. "New life from old wounds." "I'm working with a school in Bangladesh," the researcher added. "They're building floating gardens for when floods come, so they can still eat. No grand speeches, just ordinary people sharing ordinary acts of courage. And in that simplicity, the world began to heal, not all at once, but piece by piece, hand by hand." The systems of control were still there, but their power was fading because people had remembered something older than laws, deeper than borders. We are each other's keepers, and as long as that truth lived, no amount of force could erase it. 5 years didn't fix everything, but they changed what was possible. The world still had storms, droughts, and injustice. But something deeper had shifted. People no longer believed they had to wait for someone else to make things right. They'd learned to build while the ground shook. In Kenya, the village that once watched its water burn now had a solar-powered pump, a community garden, and a small school built from recycled bricks. The girl who sat in silence by the blackened reservoir was now 19, standing in a courtroom in The Hague, not as a victim, but as a witness. She spoke calmly, clearly, about what happened that day, about how her brother's video sparked something bigger than fear. Her words helped support a new legal effort to recognize environmental destruction as a crime against humanity. It wasn't revenge she wanted. It was accountability. And maybe, just maybe, prevention for others. After her testimony, she didn't fly straight home. She visited other young people from places like hers, indigenous teens from Canada, farmers' children from India, islanders from the Pacific. They shared stories not of despair, but of what they were creating. One group had turned plastic waste into building tiles. Another ran a radio station from a repurposed shipping container. They laughed, argued, dreamed, and realized they weren't alone anymore. Deep in the Amazon, the man who lost his cousin now walked with a different kind of purpose. He helped open a learning center where elders taught forest knowledge alongside young people who brought skills like drone mapping and digital storytelling. Children learned to identify medicinal plants and code simple apps that tracked animal movements. The forest wasn't just protected, it was alive with new ways of honoring old wisdom. When government officials finally came to talk about land rights, they didn't arrive with soldiers. They came with notebooks. And for the first time, the conversation wasn't about how much the land could be sold for, but how it could be cared for. Together. Up north, the researcher no longer worked alone in a cold apartment. She co-founded a global network called Root and Rise, a mix of scientists, artists, teachers, and healers who believed data should serve people, not profits. Their latest project was a truth and repair archive, not just recording harm, but showcasing solutions. A farmer in Mali showed how he revived dry soil using ancient composting methods. A grandmother in Vietnam taught how to weave flood-resistant homes from bamboo. Every story was verified, translated, and shared freely, no paywalls, no passwords. Schools began using it as a living textbook, not to teach fear, but resilience. Around the world, small changes added up. Kenya passed a law making ecocide, a word few knew 5 years ago, a punishable crime. Brazil restored millions of acres of rainforest to indigenous stewardship. The European Union required big companies to fund ecological repair if their actions caused damage overseas. None of it was perfect. Enforcement was messy. But the idea had taken root. You can't destroy life and call it progress. In cities, people kept building alternatives. Rooftop gardens fed neighborhoods. Community workshops repaired everything from phones to shoes, slowing down the throwaway culture. In one town, former factory workers turned an empty warehouse into a tool library, where anyone could borrow a drill, a sewing machine, or a pressure cooker. We share what we have, they said, because enough is a choice, not a number. Even corporations began shifting, not out of kindness, but because people stopped buying silence. When a major brand was linked to polluted rivers, customers didn't just boycott. They organized repair days, fixing old clothes instead of buying new ones, and posted videos saying, "We don't need your guilt marketing. We need clean water." Sales dropped. Policies changed. But the real victory wasn't in laws or markets. It was in hearts. Children grew up seeing care as strength. Teenagers organized climate cafes where they served tea and talked about grief and hope. Elders were listened to, not just remembered. People looked at each other not as strangers, but as neighbors in a shared struggle. One spring day, in a city square once used for protests, a mural appeared overnight. No permission, no fanfare, just bright colors and simple words. We were told to be civilized while the world burned. So we chose to be human instead. Below it, someone had planted wildflowers in old boots, tin cans, broken teacups. Life growing from what was discarded. That evening, people gathered not to march, but to sit. Some brought food. Others brought songs. A few just sat quietly, watching the sunset paint the mural gold. No speeches. No leaders. Just presence. And in that quiet togetherness, the journey came full circle. It hadn't been about winning. It had been about waking up. Waking up to the truth that systems built on greed and silence would never protect what matters. Waking up to the power of ordinary hands joining together. Waking up to the fact that healing isn't passive, it's something you do with your whole life. The girl from Kenya returned home. She didn't become famous. She became a teacher. In her classroom, students didn't just learn science. They tested water from the well, planted seeds, recorded bird calls. Knowledge isn't just in books, she told them. It's in the soil, the wind, your own voice. The man in the forest still walks the same paths, but now children walk with him, pointing out animal tracks, asking questions. He smiles more these days, not because the threats are gone, but because the future has roots. And the researcher? She still works late into the night. But now, she gets messages like, "Your map helped us stop a mine," or, "My students built a rainwater system from your guide." She saves everyone, not as proof of success, but as reminders that change grows slowly. Like trees. The world isn't saved, but it's being tended. And that, it turns out, is enough. Because when people choose to be humankind, stubborn, creative, connected, there's always a way forward. Not with grand explosions. But with daily acts of courage disguised as care. And in that quiet revolution, Earth found its voice again, not through shouting, but through the steady rhythm of people choosing life together.